Thank you for that. Like I said, my name is Randy Engstrom. I've been the director of the Office of Arts and Culture in the People's Republic of Seattle for 8 years. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is just sort of how we've wandered our way through this journey around racial equity, around cultural policy, and really looking at the intersection of place and values and culture in our city. I also come from the unceded lands of the Coast Salish and the Muckleshoot and the Duwamish. I think it's important to acknowledge that all of us are on stolen land. And that, when we're talking about equity in our work, I have to acknowledge the phenomenal privilege that I enter that space with as a cis white male. And I feel like it is partly that privilege that bears the responsibility of doing this work. I think it is healing work, and I think it's generational work. I am going to share my screen and start down this conversation. Can you all see that okay? Great. So as I said, I do want this to be more conversational. As we are going through the presentation, feel free to raise your hand if there's language I'm using that's unfamiliar, or if there is anything you have a question about. We're going to sort of go through the history of local arts agencies, a little bit of conversation about cultural policy, the way in which we've seen that shift, how racial equity shows up in that work, and then what are some ways that we might operationalize our commitment to racial equity as an office. I recognize that everyone doing this is doing this work, this cultural work, this administrative work, this creative work, is doing it through the context that they come from. I recognize that Seattle is a dark blue dot in a light blue state, and that what we do may not look like what everyone can do where they are. But I think everyone has the ability to do work from the position they enter from, and to lean on the unique strengths and assets of the community that you come from. Arts as the How is a frame that I've used pretty much since I came into this job, because I think it describes the way in which I see culture and its role in community evolving. And in particular, we are in this absolutely cataclysmic and transformational moment, both of COVID-19 and the attendant economic hardship that it's caused, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and the sort of racialized reckoning that I think our country is wrestling with. Our country and our field. And so it's that context in which this presentation is offered to you. I sort of ground it in like the history of cultural policy in this country has largely been by my purview in these four areas. We have been grant makers. We have invested in the cultural sector. We have pioneered and led the public art field starting in the early 70s. We have owned, managed, maintained, invested in cultural festivals, and we have owned and operated cultural facilities. This, I would say, is, there are 4,500-ish local arts agencies in the United States. All of them do some combination of these four things. And this is the context in which this field was built out of the 1960s with the birth of the National Endowment for the Arts. And these are all important activities. I would offer that I think some of these, something that has happened is that these interventions of funding of public art, of festivals and facilities often can be an end to themselves. And what we've tried to ask is, why do we do these things? What is the value of investing in arts and culture? Why do we have a public art program? What is the purpose of a festival or a cultural facility in a community? Why is there an Office of Arts and Culture in Seattle? And I think as our field has wrestled with some of these conversations, what are the emerging practices of cultural policy beyond just those first four things that we talked about? And we look back to the early 2000s and the rise of arts education. And more recently, in the last decade, a lot of work around creative placemaking. There is a long-standing arc of work around diversity and then inclusion and then equity. But I think the field has recognized that it has privileged some forms and not others. And so there has been a conversation ongoing about that work. And also creative economy. I think, not to lay it all at the feet of Richard Florida, but I think a lot of the conversations around the value of arts and culture have been translated into an economic argument, which is a real argument. And I would argue that the future of work is going to be driven a lot more by creativity with the rise of AI and 5G and automation. But these are the 4 areas of practice that I think have been shaping cultural policy over the last 20 years or so. So what does that trend look like, and what does that mean going forward? And I would offer that it's moving from what to how. Culture in our communities is less about that thing on the stage, that painting on a wall, that sculpture in a park, and it's more about the way in which it advances intersectional priorities in a community. It's how we're going to prepare our young people to be successful in school and in life. It's how we're going to grow our local economy. It's how we're going to bring tourists back to our city when it's safe to reopen. I think the role of artists and the role of culture is going to look different and is going to be more explicitly intersectional in the way in which it's applied and the way in which it's resourced, particularly coming out of COVID-19 and in response to the Black Lives Matter moment that we're all in. This is a slide I stole from the Not Just Money, Equity, Issues, and Arts Philanthropy by Holly Sidford and the Helicon Collaborative. Many of you are probably familiar with this work. They did a report, oh, it's Layla. They did a report about 10 years ago that showed that the lion's share of arts philanthropy, both public and private, goes to 2% of the organizations that overwhelmingly represent the white Western canon in the cultural sector. What they found when they revisited that work several years later, this is now 2017, where these numbers are from, is that while we talk about equity a lot, our numbers are actually worse. And now 58% of the money goes to 2% of the organizations representing budgets of greater than $5 million a year. We also know that the organizations who have budgets greater than $5 million are overwhelmingly white and Western canon. This is a symptom of a structure. It is not the menacing act of individual criminals or villains. It is just the end result of a system that was built perhaps unintentionally that privileged certain functions over others. And so it's in that context that we start, oh, there we go. Yeah, that we start with sort of racial equity and arts philanthropy. And these are some slides that I use in doing some trainings that I've done. I'm on the board of Grantmakers in the Arts. I give Grantmakers in the Arts a lot of credit for really leaning into the racial equity conversation, particularly in the philanthropic sector. There is a much longer 2-day training that we do around racial equity and arts philanthropy with GIA. But one of the things that I've been privileged to do is to offer some of our work as a case study. And you know, one thing I'll say is that in the context of trying to do racial equity work in the cultural sector, and particularly in local government, it is a journey, not an action, meaning like this is something that we're going to be doing and we're going to be continually working at for a long time. And so part of how we lean into that is we look at practices that guide our work. These are the guardrails that have allowed us to explore this over the last 7 or 8 years as a department. In no way does this mean we have it right or that we have it figured out. It just means that this is the process we hold ourselves to try to move this work forward. We're explicit about naming and centering race. There is a long conversation that we can have or not today about cultural equity versus racial equity. As a city and as a department, we choose to say what we mean and mean what we say. And when we're talking about equity, we're talking about racial equity. We talk about seizing on catalytic moments. You see this Black Lives Matter mural that was painted here after the CHOP was established, post Black Lives Matter protests in Seattle. There are moments where the ground beneath us shift, and those are moments where radical change can be possible. And there are a number of those events that have happened in the time I've been in this job, and what we've really tried to do is capitalize on those moments. COVID is another one of those moments. Another is interrogating hard questions. I often say that the act of pursuing liberation or racial justice is a lot like the act of creating art, in that you have to imagine something that's never existed, and then you have to try to bring that thing into the world. And I think the act of pursuing equity is the interrogation of hard questions and hard truths about our history. I have a lot of appreciation for the 1619 Project and for similar interventions that have really asked us to look at not just where we are, but how we got here. Because if we can't understand our history, we are never going to be able to mitigate its historical impact and move forward together. And the last element is that this is not a transactional practice. This is a transformational practice. We have to move towards culture shift. We have to make the culture of our organization different, not just our practice. A wise person once told me that culture eats strategy. So you can have the best strategic plan in the world, but if your culture won't embrace that strategy or that work, it's going to fail. And so we have to always be pushing for culture shift. In the presentation that we did with GIA, we used a couple of case studies in our work. One is about how you can bring a new programmatic intervention to bear that focuses on explicitly on an underserved population, a racially underserved population, in our case with arts education. And the other is how you might look at an existing body of work and make it more racially equitable through a process, in this case we call a racial equity toolkit. So the Creative Advantage is a partnership that our office began with the Seattle School District, Seattle Public Schools, in 2007. Prior to the 1980s, Seattle had one of the best arts education curriculums in the country. It gave us folks like Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain. And due to the rise of Reaganomics, a steady disinvestment in primary and secondary education, arts education was systematically removed from public education unless you were fortunate enough to go to a school with a PTA that could raise the money to hire art teachers. It wasn't only arts education, it was also PE, civics, and other courses that were eliminated. But we noticed this gap, and we noticed that you could predict access to students' access to arts education by race and family income and home language. And so in 2007, we approached the school district and said, if we give you $100,000 a year, will you reconstitute your visual and performing arts department? That partnership grew a bunch of new arts education classes in our 102 public schools, and eventually caught the attention of the Wallace Foundation, who gave us enough money to really build a comprehensive plan. That plan's goal was to restore arts learning to every student in Seattle Public Schools by 2020. I will say that had COVID not hit, we actually would be celebrating that milestone today. We had to pivot early this year, so we have a few more schools still to reach. But this program explicitly centered the needs of our Black and Brown students, the kids who were furthest from educational justice, the ones who were most, by the data, unlikely to have access to arts learning. And it's been successful both in its reach and implementation, and incredibly successful in student outcomes. In fact, the Media Arts Skill Center, which is a arts integrated vocational school in the district, was the most successful school in retaining students once COVID hit and everything went remote. We're having a really, really difficult time, as I imagine most school districts are, tracking our young people who are now, with the digital divide and all the other obstacles they have, getting lost. There are students who are just being lost by our public school system. And the programs that have had the most success in retaining students have been those that are arts integrated and that have a relationship to the Creative Advantage. So what I would describe Creative Advantage as what John Powell calls targeted universalism. We wanted to do a program that would bring arts education access to every single of the 54,000 students in Seattle Public Schools by targeting those who are the furthest from educational justice, by prioritizing the needs of the students who have the least access. And in doing so, we've been successful, and we are on track to meet the goal of every student having access. It won't be by 2020. We're hoping by 2021. Hashtag who knows, because COVID is a monster. The second process we used, and this is, the city of Seattle has had a race and social justice initiative since 2007. It has survived more mayors than I have. I've been through 5 mayors. This one's been through 6. The Race and Social Justice Initiative, it exists because the city of Seattle recognizes that the public sector and public policy has been complicit in creating the inequitable outcomes that are experienced by communities of color in our city. Therefore, we have a responsibility to practice some restorative justice and to change the way in which we do our work to rebalance the outcomes that folks experience. A racial equity toolkit is a process by which you look at a program, policy, or initiative, and you center the community that you want to be serving. You center the community that you want to benefit from this policy, and you ask a bunch of questions like, what are the unintended consequences? What are the barriers to participation? What are there things like this that exist already? And really, it's putting the most impacted folks at the center of the work you want to do in order to arrive at a different outcome. And we had a cultural facilities fund as an office. Many of you probably have some sort of capital facilities funding in your world, in your departments. And we were in a moment where, Seattle was a booming economy. Our budget was growing pretty dramatically, and our facilities fund was going from $250,000 to $1 million. So as that climb happened, we didn't want the usual suspects to just corner the market on those resources. And so we said, how are we going to ensure that communities who haven't had access to these resources can? And we did a toolkit process on it. We convened about 100 artists of color and arts administrators of color, and we asked them, what are the barriers? What are the opportunities? We wound up completely changing the criteria. You're no longer required to be a nonprofit. There's a whole bunch of changes that we made to the fund. And as a result, in the previous year, prior to the Racial Equity Toolkit, we funded, I think it was 32% of the organizations were represented communities of color, organizations of color. After the toolkit, that number went to 78%. Largely, it's by being intentional about saying who you want to serve and why you want to serve them. And in that way, it creates the prioritization in the context of your panel process and your application. If you have a result you want to see, you have to design a process that can get you to that result. And that is a bit of what a racial equity toolkit can help you do. It also recognizes that we don't have the answers. Lord knows government does not have all the answers. And often community is well aware and very equipped to be able to respond to what it is that they need. And what this process does is try to invite a conversation between the two. So this is just sort of what we've learned through doing this work over many years. Centering those most impacted in solution building, that's the Racial Equity Toolkit predicate. Support staff leadership development. The thing I'm the most proud of are the staff who have moved up and out of our office and are now running institutions throughout Seattle. And in fact, there will be a time not far from now when I need to step aside and let the next leader of the office take it to where it needs to go. We have to interrogate the ways in which we are complicit in systems of oppression. The government has done and continues to do harm. We could talk about the last 4 months and what it's been like to work in city government, because it's been really, really challenging. But we are complicit in these systems. We are upholding oppression, and we have to look at ways that we do that so we can unpack it. We have to foster internal and external systems of accountability. So we have a change team inside of our office, and we also have external accountability partners in community. They help us stay honest in this work. We are a very outcome-oriented society, and you have to have strong outcomes in order to know if your work is successful, but the process matters too. So the way in which we get to success with something like Creative Advantage or the Facilities Fund matters as much as the outcome. We aspire to be transformational versus transactional. You heard me say that at the top of this presentation. At the end of the day, the arts can transform us. And when we get trapped in a transactional binary game, we're not at our strongest. Be bold, because imagination drives everything. If we can't see a better world, then we're going to be playing at the edges, and we're never going to make the fundamental change that we need to. And don't be afraid to pause and attend to the traumas that inevitably come up. These are heavy, intergenerational, cross-sector, systemic problems and challenges that we are wrestling with, and we are going to make mistakes. So don't be afraid to pause and to look at the ways in which we can meet the needs that emerge. I want to pivot to a way in which we've tried to programmatically operationalize some of that work. I said earlier, arts education and grant making, those are two very tried and true practices in emerging and established cultural policy. I think there's always ways to improve them, and they will always matter and be a core part of our practice. But this concept, the Cultural Space Agency, is born out of the same concept that, or the same programmatic area in our office that gave us the Cultural Facilities Fund and its attendant Racial Equity Toolkit. We, I think, still have the only cultural space affordability program in the country. partly because we're one of the most expensive cities in the country. And we recognized many years ago that you can give $5,000 and $10,000 grants for the next 50 years, but you are never going to keep up with the cost of living in our city. We need policy tools. We need to create permanent long-term affordability. We need to create pathways to ownership. We need to foster vehicles of community wealth building. We need to get way bigger and way more structural, or else we're just going to be chasing an ever increasing rent proposition. So we built this cultural space program, and the Cultural Space Agency is essentially its thesis. It's a new organization that we're chartering. It is a quasi-governmental, it's called a public development authority, which means it can utilize public dollars and it can actually have public land, which we can't legally give to a nonprofit or a for-profit. And it is explicitly about community wealth building and recovery and preserving culture in our city. Here's our wordier description: an independent, mission-driven cultural real estate development agency. This is about us getting in the game. It is, I think we are trained in our sort of neoliberal cultural habits to respond and react to the market and to follow what the market will bear. This actually says, no, we're going to try to hack capitalism. We're going to try to hack the system and see if we can't come up with a better outcome. The most important thing about the Cultural Space Agency is that it's the very first thing in its 38-page charter are its values. And these values were co-created with community. We did a 1.5-year-long racial equity toolkit with 60 community members that designed how this model would work. Explicit community control, total self-determination, and a real clear path for community to realize meaningful wealth creation on their own terms. So we talk about keeping race in the room. We talk about building community wealth, which I've said a number of times. This idea of who decides, which actually Regina Smith at the Kresge Foundation deserves credit for that phrase. But what that really is about is we're going to be radically transparent with not just what the decisions are, but how they were made. We have found in doing this work carefully in community that folks are a lot more willing to live with a decision that was made if they understand where and how it was made, even if it's not the decision they would make. And I think that sometimes we try to be radically democratic, but there's always one more level of who decides. So, the panelists selected this award. Well, that's great. Who selected the panelists? And who selected the people that selected the panelists? And so we try to just be as transparent as we can about that construct. We really lean into this idea of assets not being always financial. Cultural wisdom has value. Community experience has value. Lived experience has value. Sweat equity has value. So what we're trying to do is translate cultural capital into financial capital. We developed a lot of this work through a cohort that we started about 3 years ago called Build Art Space Equitably, which is 40 POC individual members, half from the real estate community and half from the cultural community, who co-created a curriculum around how we can teach folks to be savvy with issues around space and land use and real estate. And so we're trying to translate both the value of culture upstream and the value and the access to capital downstream. And finally, always be learning. If there's anything I've taken away from 8 years in this job, it's that we never have all the answers. And we have to be humble, and we have to know that things are going to continue to shift and they're going to continue to change. The last thing I wanted to talk about with you before we just open it up for discussion is sort of the thesis of, I think, my 8 years in this job. And to me, it's what I think the answer is to the triple crisis that we find ourselves in. I think that we are approaching a new works progress administration moment as a country. I think COVID is going to be with us for some time, best case scenario through the middle of next year. And I don't think there are many businesses, small businesses, large businesses, nonprofits, for-profits, cultural or other, who have a plan to be closed for 1.5 years. I just think that the nature of this disease and the way in which its response was managed has created a situation that is going to require government to take a more active role than it's taken in the past. And I would offer, candidly, we're staring down what could be as close to an extinction event as we're going to see in both the cultural sector, the nonprofit cultural ecosystem that I've worked in for most of my adult life, and in local government. Because we're seeing local revenues reduced and we're seeing folks collapse. You know, the nonprofit sector wasn't very well capitalized before this time, and now it's really being tested. So what's likely, in my opinion, to come in a first wave of resource is going to be some form of workforce or infrastructure stimulus. If we can guide that workforce or infrastructure stimulus towards the cultural sector, we can both meet the hardest hit needs first. You know, our sector was completely hammered in early March. You know, the entire cultural sector and the artists who depend on it for their income and the administrators and stage technicians, they were immediately sidelined. Secondly, there's an opportunity to redeploy the incredible value that artists have been bringing to their communities throughout this pandemic. I have never been more inspired in my life with the art that's being created as I have been in this, the scariest and darkest of times for a lot of the work and the institutions that they're trying to work within. And this is our opportunity to radically reimagine the field, to put a down payment on the world, not as it was, but as it could be. The Office of Arts and Culture was chartered in 1971 under 34-year-old Mayor Wes Ullman, the same year that Boeing laid off 65% of its workforce. 65,000 Seattleites in a city that wasn't that big were laid off. There was a billboard next to Boeing Field that said, "Will the last person out of Seattle please turn out the lights?" And someone asked Mayor Ullman why you would form a local arts agency in the context of Seattle's greatest recession in its history. And he said, because we have to give people hope. And it's in that context that we launched Hope Corps, or we're launching, or we aspire to launch. So this is essentially a workforce redeployment strategy. We have seen artists meet these needs around belonging and social cohesion, around arts education, around mental health, around storytelling and journalism and media. Can we formalize that process? Can we leverage the skill set, the incredible value that our arts community brings, and apply it to both short-term and long-term needs that have emerged in this moment? We also are keenly aware that it was the BIPOC creative community that was hit most disproportionately. They had the least social safety net. They were the most vulnerable. They're in need of the most help. And this is a time to center their voice and amplify and fuel their work. It won't be exclusive to BIPOC communities, but it will center their voice and prioritize their work. I also think that we spent all of 2019 creating a roadmap for an inclusive creative economy, one that could grow our creative industries while reducing racial disparities within the creative economy. This is our opportunity to invest heavily in that. Our goal is to put essentially we view this as a pilot. We'd put 500 creative folks to work over the course of the next year, prioritizing those most impacted. They would come together in cohorts so that they would have a peer learning community. We would pay for professional development. They would help co-create the interventions, and we would essentially hire them as contractors. Why contractors? Well, we don't want trying to employ them through city government would be a nightmare. We don't have a good intermediary, and we could do a lot of that. We could do a lot of them as contractors, and we have a lot of rosters of existing artists that we have relationship with that we could deploy quickly and at scale. We also think that we've done a lot of cohort model learning over the last 5 or 6 years, and it's a really powerful co-creation space. So we picked these 6 categories. There could be more. I think wherever you are, you know what the needs are in your community. We are very alarmed at the threat of media and journalism, and yet sort of the on the ground community-based journalism that covered the Black Lives Matter moment and the CHOP and the Chaz during that time was incredibly important to our work. So media and journalism is a priority. Food security, the vulnerability of our food system, and the rise of local interdependent urban farming has emerged. We think that's cultural work. We're working with a number of departments on that issue. public health, and in particular, public health messaging, we are struggling to get the word out, y'all. We are struggling to get people to understand what they need to do to protect themselves and others. And we think artists could be some of the most powerful carriers of that message. Mental health and healing, I think we are at the edge of a fourth crisis, and it's going to be around mental health. That we are, as social creatures, are not designed to be isolated from one another in this way, and we need to intentionally invest in social cohesion, in belonging, in connection, and that's something artists are so skilled at. And we had great success doing that with arts education. Early in the pandemic. The Creative Advantage program that I referenced earlier was able to pivot all of its resources and hire a huge number of artists, teaching artists, to provide streaming content, 30 artists who each created 3 10-minute lesson plans that were streamed citywide on the school district's channel, on the city's Seattle channel, and on YouTube. And so parents like me, who are now homeschooling children, had access to arts curriculum in like April. Like not even a month into the pandemic. The school district is still struggling so hard to meet this moment, and understandably so. But it was actually our creative community that could pivot first. This is just a little bit more about media and journalism, the cohort, a little bit more about food security and urban farming. I also should give a shout out to the chefs and all the culinary workers and the mutual aid efforts. A bunch of restaurants immediately pivoted to mass feeding programs. They're facing an existential threat against their business and their livelihood, but the fact that their first instinct was to feed the people was a really powerful thing, and we want to lift that up and invest in it. Here's a little bit more about public health messaging, something that I think we believe the arts community could be incredibly helpful in doing. Mental health and healing, art therapy, healing circles. There's a lot of great work that's been happening in recent years around the value of arts and health and mental health and healing. I think we can capitalize on that. I think that belonging is probably a cornerstone of the future of cultural policy in our cities. And so that's going to be one of the cohorts. And then arts education, which we've talked about a lot. And then, here's the thesis, right? It's income to those who are the first and hardest hit. It is redeploying artists to meet the immediate needs of community through both COVID and the civil rights unrest that we're experiencing. And it's an opportunity to build back better. I will say I put the Build Back Better thing in there before that became a Biden campaign slogan, so I'm not being partisan. That was just the phrase that we were using in March and April. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I just talked a lot, and that was a lot of words. And we have like half an hour of just sort of discussion time to talk about anything that has been or was coming up with you. We have to stop at 25 after, but I wanted to give a couple pieces. I wanted to give sort of like how cultural policy has been shifting. I wanted to talk explicitly about the racial equity work. I want to talk about how you put that into practice, and then where I think this is going. Because if you're like me, our revenue stream as a department, the Office of Arts and Culture, is funded by admissions tax. The admissions tax revenue for the city of Seattle is down by 90% because everything is closed and there are no admissions. So we got to be awfully creative about how we're going to pivot our work to take advantage of the resources that we can find, which is why we put a lot of our time into the Hope Corps model, because we believe we could redeploy that creative community to really demonstrate the value of arts and culture at a scale that we haven't seen in my life. It's a lot of things. I'm happy to talk more or less about any of it. And I'm curious what would be valuable to hear more about, or what you might have questions about.
Did I miss how you're funding the Hope program?
No, so this came out of the head of intergovernmental relations, so our DC and state government liaison department. They reached out to me in April when the CARES Act funding was starting to come alive, At that time, it was supposed to be for new programs. It wasn't supposed to be to offset losses. And so they said, do you have a creative way that we could meet immediate needs through your work? And that was how we developed the model. So it was predicated on leveraging CARES Act money. It's always been based on a direct stimulus connection. In talking to Layla's colleague, Jamie Bennett, and some other national partners, they suggested that philanthropy, putting some skin in the game, would send a powerful message about the priority of this work locally. So we're talking, our goal was 1 million from local philanthropy, 5 million from federal stimulus, and we've put about $500,000 into it, a mix of public art money and grant money. And we're kind of, well, the whole world is in wait and see mode until November 3rd, because I think that's going to determine what kind of a stimulus, or if we're talking about stimulus, and what freedom local governments would have. But what we're doing in the meantime is taking existing programmatic investments and trying to do a few of the cohorts at a modest scale. And we're talking to our congressional delegation, to Pramila Jayapal, to Senator Patty Murray, about this concept and how it might scale. They need enough proof of concept that they can shop an idea like this up the chain of command in DC. But it was actually Pramila's chief of staff who said, when the WPA happened during the New Deal, it was an infrastructure package. And what if, we're talking about $1 trillion infrastructure package. What if we had 1% of $1 trillion that could go to something like this, but wouldn't have the same constraints as a 1% for public art program, but could be utilized the way that we described in Hope Corps? And I was like, yeah, I would be happy to launch a $50 billion WPA project for a new, that sounds great. How do we, and then, obviously there's a lot between here and there, but that is ultimately how I hope it's resourced. We have to do our due diligence and prove that it can work. So we're doing a cohort of teaching artists, we're doing a cohort of urban farmers, we're doing a cohort of journalists and storytellers, and we're going to try to use that as a proof of concept. And we're trying to get some local funders to put some more gas in that tank. The problem is that local funders, and you may be experiencing this where you are, they are just snowblind. I mean, no one is prepared for the scale of crisis that we're in, like triple crisis, right? And we haven't even gotten to the mental health crisis yet. So, they're thinking about food security. I rightfully, we didn't get CARES Act money as a city, and I'm fine with that. I mean, I'm the recovery and philanthropy lead for the city, and I'm like, no, let's stop a mass eviction crisis from happening. Let's make sure that families can feed their kids. Can we please get digital access for every student, so we're not just losing kids in the educational system? And I do think we have to handle that first. I think artists can be involved in all of the, when we're doing small business relief, cultural organizations are businesses too, and they employ people too, and they should also have access to that money. And that we saw that bear out with PPP. But it's a very long and wandery answer to your question. But we hope it is both a mix of our own resources, largely stimulus dollars, and philanthropy in the middle to scale it up.
Randy, hi everybody. That was so great. Thank you so much for sharing. I learned a lot too, just in terms of the language you gave for it. So thank you for that. It was really helpful to see. Just to that point, this is not so much a question, it's more of a comment, observation thing that might turn into a question. So bear with me. But, one of the things I feel I noticed about your work and where you sit is that there has been an enabling environment for it. And when we just, in conversations about creative placemaking or just like how we get support for our field, the one thing I feel like I hear over and over again is that it's just so dependent on how every place and kind of who, what relationships you have that are strong, and where you can draw on like that interagency partnership. And just based on some of the things you said of like why you were able to get to where you are, it's because there was a lot of that groundwork laid already. And so maybe, I guess the question is like, knowing that the relationships, that is a key thing, I guess this might not be something you can easily answer, because I think it's so state by state and place specific. So maybe other folks can chime in if that's actually something that they are struggling with, but I guess like how do you approach that when you are in, so this is maybe not just a question for you, Randy, but like, how do you all approach that, or like what's been a success story of, building that foundation for those relationships so that you can actually get some of this stuff to happen and folks can trust you in the first place.
Does anyone want to speak to that? I mean, I can name, well, feel free, just feel free to come off mute if you want to say something. But to that point, Layla, I said this at the beginning, I think before you were here, but it's not lost on me that I'm, in a liberal city and in a pretty liberal state, and therefore the more progressive things that we want to do are probably easier to do. And Kelly and I used to both be on a trip once a year with West Staff to go to DC to meet with our congressional delegation and ostensibly do the dog and pony show about why the NEA is good and why the arts are good, and bring them Skittles or whatever treat would delight our congressional delegation. But something I learned from that was that at that time there was actually more of an even split between R's and D's on the Hill from Washington, but they all were really excited about the creative economy. They all were really excited about arts education. One year when we met with Kathy McMorris Rogers, she was in House leadership for the Republicans, and she shared that she played piano in her high school musical. And like, there is a humanity, if we can get there, and maybe that's naive and Pollyanna in the world that we're in now, but there is most people want to see their local economy succeed. Most communities want to see their young people succeed. I found a lot of success in explaining how the one thing the robots can't take, the one thing we'll never automate is creativity, that human empathy can't be automated. And so if we can invest in that, we are actually readying our students and our local economy to be more competitive when that work continues to happen. So I think you definitely have to take an approach that will find an audience. But I think despite the echo chamber rhetoric that exists and that I'm complicit in, there are still through lines. There are still basic, people want to be safe. They want to be healthy. They want their kids to succeed. They want there to be an earth for their, for the most part, for an earth for their kids to inherit. Like, there are ways to make that connection, and everything is relationships. If I came into this job 8 years ago and just had this sweeping new agenda that I thought was really great, it wouldn't have worked. We had to co-create it. We had to build trust. Right now in our city, we are at a very scary impasse. Even in like deep blue liberal Seattle, the mayor, the council, the police department, and the activist community are all in different corners, and they are dug in. And until we can find a way to build enough trust to have a story about the city we could be, that one or more people can move from their corners, we're just in this, we're frozen. And I feel like we've seen our federal government be frozen for the last several months. And I think if we have to find a way to build relationship and to build trust. I don't pretend to have the answer, and the context is wildly different everywhere, but you're right, Layla, that you have to understand your community and what is unique to your community, and you have to be able to work from where you are, and build your relationships and find those common grounds.
I'm going to comment on something that I heard you say, and that led me to something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is, you said until we can build a story that brings us together. And I think that gets at something that, we talk a lot about the economy, of our case for the arts. But I think that idea of the role that the arts play in bringing us together, in all of these other areas of our lives, in health, in food security, in education, that we really have an opportunity, I think, in this moment, coming through this pandemic, to tell that story better, and to really put an emphasis on the importance of the arts in bringing our our nation together and our communities back together. And I'm interested in what others are thinking about in terms of how you're messaging the value of the arts in this moment when it is so hard, I think, to make the case for funding the arts. And yet those of us who work in this area see every day how the arts are so imperative across sectors.
I think you're right. And I think that I have been spending a lot of time lately with my mentor and friend, Roberto Bedoya, who is the director of cultural affairs for the city of Oakland. And when he came into the job, he did a cultural plan, but the cultural plan is called Belonging in Oakland. And he's really put forward this idea that belonging is at the core of what a local arts agency does. It creates a permission structure for us to coexist, to lift up stories, to celebrate who we are and where we are. And I think what that leads to, hopefully, is a civic narrative. And to your point, Libby, my way of trying to cut through the like four corners where our leadership and our police department, our activist community is to foster a civic narrative that enough people can see themselves in, that articulates the kind of city that we want to be. Because weirdly, well, maybe not the police department, but the other three branches of that conversation are pretty similarly aligned, and as is the police department with what they say. So if we can tell a story that everyone can see themselves in, then maybe we can de-escalate the binary conflict or the weird Game of Thrones that seems to happen, and direct it towards a place where we can all be part of something bigger. But I think we are conditioned to form the circular firing squad, right? We're conditioned to live in a scarcity mentality where we have to be pitted against each other. And could that be a role that local arts agencies and that the cultural sector plays, that we are the way by which we get through that? We have a bigger story about who we are and what we do, and we value storytelling as a critical part of the work of a city, of a community, of a state, of a county. That identity work is so important, and the absence of that identity work turns everything into just transactional commerce. Then we're all just victims of brands, and I don't think that that's where folks want to be. So I would offer that if our historical work was around grant making and public art, I think our future work is around belonging and civic narrative, within which grant making and public art are a part, right? Public art was the original creative placemaking. It was around investing in artists to physically shape the environment when investments are made by the public sector to articulate the identity, the expression of a city. It got, I would argue, a little boutiquey, and it moved a little bit away from the sort of more community engaged origin that I think it had. Became a little bit the providence of middle-aged white dudes. And then I think that the placemaking movement was a little more broad, right? It brought in planning, it brought in community engagement, it brought in other elements of that work. But I think it's grounded in the same, I believe that the rise of local arts agencies and cultural policy in this country was fundamentally a democratic undertaking. It was about everyone deserving access to stories and their stories being told. I am an optimist, so that is my reading of our history. Our history has lots of different ways to read it. And it was also modeled after the Ford Foundation, and so it privileged organizations that could raise a lot of money. If we're following in that tradition of democratic storytelling, then we do have an obligation, particularly as public sector funders, public sector agencies, to make sure everyone has access, everyone has an opportunity, everyone can see themselves, and we know who is and isn't represented right now. We know where the gaps are. We know what the data tells us. So how can we, I think that's where we have a responsibility to right that wrong.
Randy, I thank you so much for sharing the inspiration in the new programs and new initiatives that you are originating. The way that you're able to center on community and center on a new vision for the role of a public agency is really inspiring. I'd like you to talk a little more, if you could, about the legacy programs, though. Because in addition to all of this new initiating effort and energy, I know that you also have grant programs and other legacy programs that will continue to be part of your portfolio. Can you talk about how you are engineering shifts in some of that legacy grant making to be more equitable and to meet this moment?
That is a great question. And you're absolutely right. You know, when we were chartered, we funded 7 organizations. You could probably guess which 7 those are, or at least guess what kind of organization they were. And now we have 9 funding programs. And the Cultural Facilities Fund, because of, I mean, essentially we put forward the Cultural Facilities Fund as our sacrificial COVID initial budget reduction because people aren't doing capital projects right now because they're just trying to stay alive. And, you know, we have like a $200,000 arts education program and a $180,000 individual artist program and a really small, like $50,000 rolling deadline, super easy $500 to $1,000 grant program. But the biggest one, the cultural facility or the cultural partnerships program, which is, you know, almost $2 million. We've been on this like long journey where we're trying to get the particularly large organizations to see how doing this work is in their interest. And we've done cohort training models. And, you know, I think we've done a pretty good job in Seattle of establishing that racial equity work is the right thing to do. How well people are doing it, how well they're internalizing it, how well that shows up on their stages or in their staff is a mixed bag. But we've largely tried to catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. Is that the phrase? Like we've used more honey. We've used more carrots than sticks. Largely because we've been fortunate. We've been able to grow our budget a lot, largely through our equity work. We're now at a point where we're going to start flipping some switches. For example, we're going to take budget size out of the allocation formula, which is going to bring the symphony's grant award from $125,000 to $15,000. They're not going to like that conversation, but I think, you know, one thing we plan to do, I'm going to meet with each of the large organizations who are taking really significant cuts, and I'm going to refer them back to their statement for Black Lives that they put out in June. And I'm going to invite them to join us on this journey. Like this is all of our work. We're all complicit in the system that we have, and we're all equally able to do this work together. And let's talk about the ways we can partner, because again, the grant writing game left unto itself without any other relationship is transactional. You know, we have money, they want money, they submit a grant, we write them a check. And, you know, and grant cycles are usually won by grant, you know, they're grant writing contests that are won by good grant writers who probably have an MFA, who can probably tell you that, of course, the symphony exists for Black Lives, because look at how we, you know, they make an example, you know, you can tell a good story. And we don't have the capacity to audit the 208 organizations that we fund. And I bet that they all mean it. I bet that they all do actually want to be doing that work or even think that they are. But I think that we have to invite another layer of accountability. And I think in particular, you know, most of our work, we've done a pretty good job of walking our talk in equity. Most, you know, arts education work in most of our funding programs, even in public art, we've done a much better job of actually investing the dollars in BIPOC community, except that the general operating support program. And we have 42 staff at the Office of Arts and Culture, and 14 of them are Black. And the 14 Black staff wrote an open letter to the office, and they said, we need to do better. We've done good. We appreciate what we've done. We are demanding that the office do these 7 things, you know, if it's going to claim that it stands for Black lives. It was an incredibly courageous and powerful thing that they did. Now, and we meet with that, it's called the Black Love Union now, and we meet with them about every 2 weeks, myself and my deputy director. And it was, you know, there's been a lot of working around the edges to refine, and, you know, the panelists do anti-bias training, and we add more questions, and you identify where you are on the continuum, and you do more trainings, and like, that's all really good. That's like readiness work. Like, okay, now we have to move. Now we have to make the harder switch. Now we have to say we're going to redistribute the money. And we're redistributing the money because it's the thing that we've said we need to do for 10 years, and now we're doing it. And we invite you to be part of doing that with us. And what are the other ways we can partner? What are the other ways, what can we bring our cultural institutions, and particularly our big anchor institutions, to a bigger civic table where we can all be part of the civic problem solving that is going to be required of us, particularly to come out of COVID. You know, and I also think the average lifespan of a small business is 2 years, and the average lifespan of a nonprofit is forever. And I'm not sure that every nonprofit needs to exist until the end of time. If we can create some kind of organizational hospice, some sort of like, you know, merger fund where a couple of different institutions can come together and probably be more successful because they can share in some of that overhead, particularly on the facility side. I feel like that's a thing that's going to happen. But it's, you know, I think we've done all the readiness work that we can do. And I think, you know, we had a statement for racial equity on our website in 2016, and we felt really good about it and still feel good about it. But like, that's not enough, right? Like, whatever we've done, and as good as it's been, it hasn't been good enough. So we have to keep going. And the only thing I think you can never do in this work is assume you've got it figured out, is assume you're there, is assume that we're not there. We still work for the government. Like, the government is still super problematic. And, you know, I want to do whatever I can to help us be better. And I have to accept that we will likely never get all the way there. And this is a muscle that we have to work every day in order to learn how to use it. And it's a muscle that our office only started using a couple of years before I got there. You know, like, so of course it's going to take time. We have a sector that was built over 100 years and only started having these conversations like in the 80s. You know, and I think, and when we were having those conversations, we were definitely having them to the side, right? Like the NEA budget is like $280 million, and the like urban grants are like $100,000. You're like, okay, well, you can see where that conversation lives. And that's, you know, that's not to throw shade on anybody. That's just to say, this work is a journey, and we all come to it from where we are, and I think we have to understand that it's going to be a continuous process. It's going to be a practice versus a checklist. And, you know, I think Justin Lang talked about comfort with discomfort. And it's pretty uncomfortable to, you know, have your whole staff call you out while you're being held up as a national model for doing this work well. And that's really important. It's really important to feel that discomfort and to not only have that accountability, but to lean into it and to say, all right, let's do better. And you know, one of my other mentors, Paul Fishberg, who hired me when I got to run the Engstrom Cultural Arts Center, he said, conflict well managed builds loyalty like nothing else. And so if we're willing to lean into the discomfort, if we're willing to manage the conflict, to acknowledge, not just acknowledge that it's there, but get in there and try to figure it out and get to the other side. If you can do that and leave people's dignity intact and walk your values, I think you actually do yourself a great service. And I would just offer that no one has this figured out. I haven't met anybody that has this figured out. Certainly no white people, and certainly no one that works in government has this figured out. But I think that the equity conversation can be daunting because there's so much structural history. It's so big, it's so overwhelmingly big, and it's only gotten louder in the last 4 years. But that isn't a reason to not do it. And I think that there are a lot of folks who want to and are doing this work. And I feel very fortunate and privileged to be in lots of conversations locally and nationally with folks who are committed to this work and who are willing to be patient with me while I learn.
Hey, Randy, this is Encarnacion from Chicago. Thanks for offering some inspiration and hope. It's really great to see a motto, especially within government, that is so progressive and open and really trying to respond to the times. I think that's great. I'm envious because I think the landscape is a little different for state agencies than municipalities. I think relationship building is more accessible on a smaller scale than it is on a larger scale. So I love the fact that you mentioned inspiration, that you mentioned journey. It's never over. That you talk about the intersectionality of these times. As a person of color and an older person of color, there are some things that I've experienced and learned through time. Sometimes when you're dealing with cultural change, it could take a long time. You have to wait sometimes for people to leave their positions, to get fired, to quit, or to die. And that's a reality. As a person of color who was born in the 50s, I've experienced a lot of different times in this country where anti-racism, social equity has bubbled up in negative ways and in good ways. I've seen our society, and I'm talking about the US, make progressive lurches forward to try to make amends, to try to repair, to try to meet that goal that we're all on in our journey of a democracy, an equitable democracy. I think that one of the things that I love about your presentation is that you expose that even during times of crisis or a chaotic time like right now, there are possibilities of opportunities. And one of the things that as a person of color who's gone through a lot of different things over the years and seen us move forward and move backwards, is that right now what we're presented with is that, especially around anti-racism, is that things are exposed, they're down to the core, and we could see things, we could see where things need to be worked on, where things aren't working out. And there's also a platform during these times for those voices to be amplified and be heard. So I think that one of the things that I draw from what you're saying, and one of the things that I think is that, yes, these are times of opportunity, and these are times where things are exposed. And for my colleagues, I take us back maybe 4 or 5 months when the chaos broke out and people joined together, our humanity was exposed, and funders joined together to figure out how to provide financial support and other resources that were needed at that time. So I think that was a great thing, but I guess what I'd like to say is that we should keep that in mind, that things can be flexible, things can change. We're living in a time where there could be a lot of rapid change culturally. So I really appreciate you presenting your models and talking about some of the programs that you presented, but also the thought process behind that, because this work, we are at a pivotal time right now, but even post-COVID, post the election, all this work is going to continue. And what we've been exposed to is, whether it's a state agency or nonprofit, what is your mission? Is your mission to serve your community? Well, what's your community? And to look at it through the current lens and say, oh yeah, we say we serve our community, but do we really serve our community? As well as in funding and in large institutions. It is time, it is an opportunity to kind of like revert things and try to even the field. But it's really important, as you say, to know that this is a constant journey that we're on. And at different times, there are good opportunities, and other times you just have to kind of keep your nose to the grindstone and keep going forward. I'm sorry it went on so long, and sorry it came off as a statement, but I really appreciate your presentation.
Appreciate that. And I co-sign everything you said, and I think that might be a pretty good place to leave the conversation, actually, kind of a mic drop. I think your point about change as constant cannot be overstated. And I think no matter what happens on November 3rd, the country is going to change dramatically in very different ways, probably, although I predict we may not be nicer to each other at a meta level for a while. But I do think, I also think, I, for better or for worse, have a lot of regular check-ins with the head of public health here in Seattle. And I think winter is going to be hard at best. And, I think there's a lot we don't know. And we were already coming into this time of great disruption with AI and automation and 5G and and consolidation. And I think we have to really own adaptive management and adaptive practice as our way of being. We can't ever sit still, because I think that the world's going to change too much. And point taken about the state level. The one thing I'll say is, I think in my Hope Corps analogy, in my federal stimulus aspirations, I think that money is likely to come through states. And so I think it's actually going to be you all who are going to be the ones who are going to be helping to design that system. So I hope that in the universe of NASA, in the universe of the state agencies and the regionals, that you're having some of those conversations. Hey, I really appreciate you all spending like an hour and 15 minutes with me. I need to hand it back to Thomas, who is our guide. I'll put my email in the chat. If you guys want to stay connected or reach out at any point, I'm happy to talk more offline about whatever. I view everything I've been paid to do in this job for 8 years as public domain. So if you want to see under the hood for any of it, it's all public record. It's all for you. So you or anyone else who could find it useful. And I've really enjoyed spending time with you. So thank you.